Welcome back to Worst Seats in the House. Mike Russo, Anthony LaPanta, coming to you from Shoreview, where I'm actually in town. This is my first time in town for like 2 days in a row in 2 months, Anthony.
That's great. We're happy to have you back.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me over. You got an extra dog here.
We have an extra dog. Marvin's in town for a week. We've got an engagement party coming up in the LaPanta family up in central Minnesota this weekend.
Whose engagement?
Gianni's.
I know. I'm just kidding.
We only have one that's engaged.
Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you were invited. I'm not even going.
I don't think I was invited.
I don't even get to go. I've got to work Twins on Friday night, but the family's all coming to town. The boys will be in town. Marvin's here to get acclimated to Minnesota after living in Connecticut for a while. And we're just thrilled to have you back in town, bring some positivity, general happiness back to the Twin Cities.
Thanks for having me. I'm going through
you have no comment on that?
I'm going through these questions. We got 131 questions in an hour, and they're not helping my mood.
I don't know. You seem generally happy to me. I offered you a Portuguese red. We're heading to Portugal
I need to get in the
9 days.
Practice.
Right? 9 days?
Yeah, 9.
And so we've spent some time over the last couple of weeks diving into Portuguese wines just so that we'd have a little bit of an idea of what we were tasting, where we were going while we're over there. And I offered you one. You turned me down because you were apparently too happy already and didn't need any more wine.
Yeah. By the way, did you see that Matt Dumba replaced Ryan Suter in Dallas today?
That's very much on the topic of what we were talking about.
I just think that's so funny. Somebody brought it up on Twitter, and so I had to bring it up to you.
They're actually, and we'll get into much more of this later in the show, but the Central Division had a significant day today and some changes for the good and for the worse, I think, with some of the teams, but very active. And it certainly looks like a division that is going to be a handful for the next few years.
How about Smashville gets Jonathan Marchessault, Brady Shea at 7x7 and $8 million a year on 4-year deal for Mr. Steven Stamkos. And Barry Trotz doing the signing, which is kind of funny because you always think of Barry as Mr. Conservative.
Right.
Man, would it be nice. I was in a little group text today with a couple people there. It's going to be nice for Andrew Burnett and Darby Hendrickson.
Role reversal.
Yeah.
You've got Andrew Burnett, who everybody perceives to be this wide open offensive thinking type guy. They got into the playoffs last year because they locked it down defensively for the last couple of months of the season and rode a hot goaltender and a really good defensive core to a playoff spot. And Barry Trotz, who had made his living doing that same thing, coming out afterward and saying, we need to find a way to score more goals, and going out and getting I don't think there was a plethora of goal scorers out there in the free agent market. And they got a couple of good ones, albeit guys that are on the back end of their careers. I don't know if either one of these deals at the end of the deal will look like a great deal, but this year I think it's going to make it'll be a big plus for Nashville.
Yeah, I mean, Stamkos coming off a 40-goal year.
And Marchessault did too. Marchessault had 40.
And Marchessault, Mr. Wild Killer as well. Let's talk about the Wild. Let's start with the draft. By all accounts, just, rave reviews by all the pundits, especially at The Athletic. Both Scott Wheeler and Corey Proman just went on and on about how the Wild, quote, killed it, starting with the fact that Zeev Buium fell to them. And frankly, I think the Wild were very close to trading that 13th pick outright for Rucker McGroarty to the Winnipeg Jets. But that kid fell to them. Bill Guerin loved him. Judd Brackett loved him. The scouting staff loved him. And they get the kid that has never lost a game, by the way, at XL Energy Center.
Well, I think it's interesting because you and I had talked a couple shows ago. Kevin, when he filled in for you last week, and I talked about the fact that when you're sitting in that 13th spot, there are so many different directions the draft can go. It's different if you have the 4th pick, where pretty good idea. This guy's going 1, this guy's going 2. It's just a matter of, does this guy go 3 or not? Different if you have the 30 pick, where you're at the mercy of a million different scenarios. 13 seemed to be a precarious spot because, as you and I had talked, a lot of scouts seem to be convinced this was like a 10, 12 player impact player draft. And so as we talked, I said, you have so many scenarios in mind. What if one of the guys we have slotted as a top 10 ends up falling or is still available at 13? So I'm going to go back to the moment of the trade first, because I'd be curious what you were thinking at the time. I was just watching the draft on TV. You were obviously there. As soon as they announced the trade and said the Wild gave a 3 to move up one spot, what was your first thought?
I immediately thought they were taking the Zeev.
No, I'm saying, like, what did you think of the deal?
I thought,
giving a 3 to move up one spot?
To me, with the number of prospects the Wild have in the organization, coupled with the fact that so many guys are locked up for a long time here, like, to me, it's just a draft pick. Like, I know a lot of people look at it as like a hefty price to pay. To me, it's just a draft pick. Like, to me, it's a player that we're probably not going to see anyway, because they have all these other guys that if they make it, we're not going to ever see somebody have a chance to get there from that.
My first instinct when I heard the trade was, that's a lot to give up to move up one spot. Then there were a couple other trades.
To me, I looked at it as a small price to pay.
And there were a couple other trades, though, later in the round where it's like, well, these guys to move up 4 spots didn't give up much more than that. And there was another team that moved up 11 spots or something like that. And I was like, well, okay, so that it really wasn't that big of a price to pay. Because then once and I wouldn't ever pretend to understand or know all the players picked in the first round. Zeev Buium happened to be one guy I was aware of because I had watched Denver play a couple times late in the year, and I really like him a lot. And I love the aggressive move. I love this is the guy we want. I don't care if it's to move up 1 spot, 2 spots, whatever. If you think the guy's about to get drafted but you have a chance to move up to get him, to give away any pick is worth it for that. And as much as I know about the players who were picked in the first round, this looks like a guy to me who's going to be a very good NHL defenseman. And when you start to look at the way the Wild's defensive core is being set up for the future, I don't think it's too many years before this guy is going to be a part of it.
Right. And that's, I looked at it more like they must think that Zeev Buium is just a heck of a lot better player or is going to be a better player than Rutger McGroarty, because he's 2 years closer essentially in his development, because he's 20 years old, was drafted 2 years ago, wants to come out now, would probably be in the Wild's lineup next year. But they think so highly of Zeev and think he's a defenseman that they've never had in this organization. Ever. I mean, you and I have covered a lot of really quality defensemen in this organization's history. Jonas Brodin probably being near the top of the list, Jared Spurgeon being near the top of the list, but I don't think either of us would consider them like a true number one, definitely quarterback on the power play, nor a really bona fide number one. If they think this guy could get there, or at least bring them somebody that's going to be closer to being somebody that could actually QB a quarterback from the back end, I think it's a heck of a move.
And for what I saw of him in college, that there are elements of his game that I would agree with you that they have never had that guy. I don't know if it's fair to try to project where he'll be defensively or to say that he's going to be as good or better than the guys you just mentioned as an overall defenseman. But in terms of what he brings offensively and the fact that, yes, he looks like a guy who can run a power play, and the way he provided offense from the back end for Denver last year, I just loved it. I love the aggressiveness that I know that when we had talked about the draft going in and you had speculated that you thought the Wild were more likely to move down than up from that pick. And I love the fact that, and maybe that was their plan going in, I love the fact that when they saw that their guy was available, a guy that they wanted, let's go get him.
Yep.
And,
well, they were going to trade the pick. Trust, if that guy's not there, he's gone. They are not trade. They would not have a first round pick this year. Like, Rutger was on the clock, so to speak. And maybe he wasn't traded yet. Maybe there's a way to trade a lottery protected first next year and get him. Who knows? We'll see what Bill Guerin has up his sleeve. I still think that he would love to make a move. They don't have a lot of cap space left. You know what did concern me today before we get to the rest of the draft picks is Bill said that they only had $500,000 worth of cap space left, and it's really 2.5, which made me nervous that they're like going to overpay and overterm Declan Chisholm. I hope that's not the case, especially when you just locked up Middleton for another 4 years. You have 3 more years of Brodin. You have 2 more years of Spurge. Sorry, 3 years of Spurge. 5 years of Middleton. 4 more years of Brodin. It just seems like, and Faber's going to be about to get max deal. Wednesdays, at some point, you don't want to overterm guys because you're going to have to open up doors for, Buium. But also, if Damon Hunt or David Spacek become real true NHLers, you got to have room for them. And you think at some point they're going to hit on one of these defensemen that are in Iowa. The rest of the draft, though, really good value. I mean, Ryder Ritchie missed a lot of this year with a really gruesome injury, a quad hematoma. Said he missed basically about 11 weeks, came back. And
he was a guy that I remember reading about last year when they were throwing out the early draft projections, and they were talking him as a first rounder. Yep. So the fact that they got him outside the first round, I think, is a positive.
Yeah, great pedigree too. Obviously, his father played in the league. He said that they're very different players. Then they got a Finn in the 4th round that had an unbelievably tough year. I mean, somebody that dislocated his kneecap just shooting one-timers in practice, and he comes back and takes a skate to the throat in the Underworld 18s, and in his words, almost died on the ice. That kid was drafted in the 4th round. He whispers in Bill Guerin's ear, you just got the biggest steal in the draft. You got to love the moxie on that kid.
I like it. Yeah. I like the confidence.
Aaron is his first name. I'm not going to try to pronounce his
Kibaharu, I believe.
Yeah. I just got to spell it right. You got to eventually pronounce it right. But real quality, again, another one that had 1st round potential. So, look, in the history of drafts, everybody's like, we had that guy way higher on the list. That guy would have been a 1st round pick. I've heard that 1,000 times. The Wild truly believe they almost got, 3 1st round quality type players in the draft. So, really good draft. Also, Bill Guerin met with Brock Faber's agents for the first time to start talking about an extension that they hope to sign this summer. We'll see where that goes. They're going to try to get it at an 8-year deal in the 8 ranges. I'm sure is what they would love it to land at. I'm sure his agents have higher things. But it's interesting. We saw the kid that re-signed in Montreal today, the 2 that got 7.6 a year. They're the top pick a couple years ago. There's no such thing as a bridge deal, it seems like, in the NHL these days. These second contracts
the players all seem to be wanting to just, I want to lock in.
Yeah, which is kind of like, it's cool to get stability and security and guaranteed money, but if the cap's going to keep on rising the next couple of years.
Not only that, but the beauty of the old bridge deals for the players were that now you'd make that one big deal when you were a little bit more proven, where you might be able to make the big deal slightly bigger. I guess from the other perspective, if you sign this first long-term deal right now, this deal's up and you're still young enough where you might have one more lucrative free agent deal in you at the end of this. But the old bridge deals where it was bet on yourself or not seem to have gone away. Most of the players seem to be grabbing the long-term stability right now rather than saying, I'm going to bet on myself for 3 or 4 years down the road.
We'll see what happens next summer when Marco Rossi's up. Obviously, he's got 1 year left, and he's somebody that I'd be surprised that the Wild want to go that long with. He might be that prototypical bridge deal. What did you think of the Sphere? Did you watch any of it? I mean, it was unbelievable.
Well, yes, I did, is the short answer. I watched the first round and had it on in the background of.
How did it look on TV?
It looked good on TV.
But you couldn't really
wasn't just blown away by it on TV as everybody that was there seemed to think. And I haven't been inside the Sphere, so I've seen it only from the outside. It looked great, and some of the effects and I remember the guys on TV talking about the fact that they had this unbelievable setup for the first time. There was a trade and the horn was going to blow and everything. And I mean, then it happened and I was like, well, that wasn't that big of a deal. It was cool. I think it looked good though. And everything that I've heard from anybody that's been to a show inside there or been to any kind of event in there is that it's unbelievable.
Yeah, it was truly unreal. It was probably the most comfortable draft I've ever covered. We were like right on the floor. The problem is it was really scaled down. And we, the one thing with the risers is that I could see everything. Where in this one, it's like, and if you watch my live tweeting, it's like I could see right at Winnipeg's table. I could not get any look at the Wild table because I was level with the floor and they were across on the other side. I had a buddy that went to the draft that sat in the upper bowl, and I saw him the next day, and he started giving me the play-by-play of the Wild table, and Billy answering the phone and then going over and talking to Ray Shiro and all this stuff. I'm like, dude, you could have sent me a text and let me know some of that color. I was constantly like paying attention to Winnipeg and that whole thing there, but I couldn't really see the Wild table. But it was, the graphics were just unreal, and it was straight above our head, and it was truly unreal. And with the Zeev Buium trade, the reason why they traded the third is that they were watching on the draft floor St. Louis trying to move up with Philly, and they don't know if that's who they were going to take. They assume it was, but the one thing that's interesting about that is that they're going to the decentralized draft next year, and there's now starting to be scuttlebutt from a lot of teams that they don't want to do it, and they want to go back to this, having everybody in one place, because it is a fun thing. But that example where the Wild admit they watched St. Louis do this, and that's why they made the trade, makes you think that those are the reasons why they might get rid of it, because there is a way now that you don't have to worry about. You can have actual conversations in your war room and things like that.
But I also think that's part of the fascination of the draft for me, is because you have no idea. You don't know who Philly's planning to take with that pick. There's all the rumors ahead of time, who they like, who they don't like. You don't know who else they might be talking to. And whenever anybody would ask me, well, what do you think the price to move up one spot? And I always just say to them that, well, you don't know what somebody else is offering. If somebody else calls them and says, hey, we'll give you a 4 to move up one spot, and they call the Wild back and say, here's what we have on the table, either you top it or we're dealing it to them, then you have to make the deal.
Right.
So those dynamics are interesting.
A lot of trust, too. And you don't know what's telling the truth.
Yeah.
It's like when Todd Reynolds said to the Wild today, we have a 4-year deal at 3. And they're like, all right, here's 4 at 3.5, when it probably was 2 at 2.5.
Maybe. But you also, that's all the research that's done ahead of time. So you've got an idea of what might be out there. But it's kind of cool to be in the room and you watch as, all right, somebody else just picked up the phone. Philadelphia, somebody picked up the phone. They're talking to them. All right, well, let's make sure we get the deal done. I think it's kind of cool to have everybody in the same spot. And so many times we've talked to Billy over the years. We talked to Chuck Fletcher over the years about the fact that sometimes deals that happen in a blink of an eye, but they happen in a blink of an eye because of conversations that might have happened 6 months ago at an event like this,
right,
where you got an idea that, hey, they kind of like this guy. We're all of a sudden in the market for a different type of player who they have. I know because of that chat way back on draft night that I think it's just different when it's in person as opposed to over text or phone calls impersonally.
Yep, I totally agree with you. Yeah, it was definitely a fun time. It was a blast being there. Love being in Vegas too. I ate at a restaurant called Herbs and Rye. Have you ever been there?
No.
Oh, it's unbelievable. We're going next time we're in Vegas. Steakhouse, old school.
Where is it?
It's right off the strip, like kind of near down by like Stratosphere, only toward Summerlin. And it's just old school. Cocktails are incredible. Prices are actually affordable, so we're going there. It's done.
All right, I'm in.
I'm going to get my restaurant choosing privileges back.
We'll see about that, but
yeah. All right. When we come back, we're going to talk about today's free agent news, the interviews that we did with Bill Guerin. Also talked to John Hines about next year's roster and some of the changes that he's thinking of making, including in training camp. We'll be right back.
Summer temps are rising,
But at Aquarius, it's time for their summer meltdown of savings. Get up to $3,000 off a new high-efficiency cooling and heating system. Plus, with a qualifying purchase, you'll get a free whole home air purification system. Stay cool and comfy with amazing air quality for years to come. It all starts with a free in-home consultation. One of their highly trained comfort specialists will provide options that make sense for you and your home. And that's not all. Enjoy special prices on new heat pumps and mini splits and 50% off an AC tune-up. Don't miss Aquarius's Meltdown of Savings sale now through July. Schedule today at AquariusHomeservices.com. Aquarius believes in earning the right to be recommended, and don't forget to mention that Russo sent you.
Don't wait. Save smarter with a 5.15% annual percentage yield 9-month certificate from Royal Credit Union. Royal's 5.15% 9-month certificate has no minimum opening balance and a locked-in rate for a guaranteed return on your investment. Open a 5.15% 9-month certificate at any Royal office or online at rcu.org/certificate515. Early withdrawal penalties could reduce earnings and principal. APY accurate as of 4/26/24.
Back here, worst seats in the house, Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta, coming to you from the household that is LaPanta's. You heard his dogs barking previous segment.
They're on duty to make sure that we're safe while doing the show, because we have been threatened in the past.
Yep, exactly.
By like a random fan walking by us in Tampa one day that caused major problems.
I think it was Mike Yo, right?
Well, it was a different guy first, then it was Mike Yo.
Yeah. Speaking of which, but you mentioned Chuck Fletcher. I ran into Chuck at the got to chat with him over at the draft too. He was working for Sportsnet, so he's a TV star now.
I've texted him a couple times when I've seen him on TV. He actually does a good job.
Yeah.
And it's been interesting to hear his perspective in hindsight, where he talks about some of the ways that decisions are made, the things that general managers have to weigh in certain situations. I've thought he's been really interesting about it, well-spoken, and I texted him a couple times after seeing him and just said, no, don't tell anybody that now that you know anybody can do television. So just let's keep that as our own little secret.
Okay, Yakov Trenin, 4 years, $14 million deal today with the Wild. Not long after they trade for Lacko, Jacob Lacko, is that how you pronounce it?
Yep.
Who makes about the league minimum, a hair above. Who we watched fight Brandon Duhaime and Connor Durr 4 days apart last December. But today was the big news. Where the Wild basically looked at the deals that David Perron was getting and some of the other guys, thought the term was too much, and definitely the price in their mind was too much. And top six was probably the one area where, Bill Guerin and them sort of said again today, they could not stretch the term out because the hope is they didn't want to go long-term 3 or 4 years in a top six role just because of guys like Yurov coming, Riley Heidt, maybe Liam Ogren this year. So now suddenly they are going to go, and this is where I want to get into my conversation with John Hines later with you, Anthony, not to jump ahead, but he basically said one of his felt the weaknesses of last year's team is that they sort of had a top five and they kind of kept on rotating guys in or out. And I basically said, does that concern you going into this year? Because it looks like it's going to be the same thing. But let's get to Trenin. We've seen him play the Wild many, many times. Aggressive, abrasive, hard hitting, skates well, will drop the gloves. We've seen that a couple times. And if you look at his offensive numbers on a fourth line role, he averages 0.7 goals per 60 minutes, which is pretty good for a fourth liner. In Minnesota, though, at $3.5 million, he's getting a third line role.
Probably. I like Trenin. I thought the average value was a hair higher than I would have guessed it would have taken to get him. We had talked so many times about what we thought the Wild might do, and I think this is an indication of the fact that they think they've got guys in the top six roles. Maybe not. Even if they're not ready this year, 2-3 years down the road, they think they will be. So you extend this guy in a third or fourth line role that fits the future, not just the present. And I like the addition. I did think that the contract was a hair higher. If you would have just said in a vacuum, how much would it cost to get Yakov Trenin, I would have probably guessed a little bit lower. But I do like his game. I thought one of the things John Hines said today that was interesting was that when Marcus Foligno went out, we didn't really have a guy that could maintain that role. This gives us another guy like that. And if you start to look at the bottom six now, where there's guys that fit in that spot, like a Foligno, like a Trenin, like a Gaudreau, like a
Hartman.
I mean, that
if it is Trenin, Hartman, Foligno, and they're healthy, that's a good
third line.
It's a pain in the
It's a really good third line.
Imagine playing against that.
But you're talking about a bottom six that now has Foligno and Trenin and Gaudreau and Husnudinov, perhaps Lauko, perhaps, and then kind of your swing guys that. Bottom six, but if you need him in a pinch to be in the top six, Hartman and Johansson would seem to be those two guys. I just think it was an example. I think it's an indication that the Wild feel like we think we have top six guys this year, for sure next year, the year after that, when you start to add Ogren and Yurov to a mix that already has Boldy, Kaprizov, Rossi, Eriksson. I just think this was a spot where this guy could be a part of right now, but also 2-3 years down the road. Without a doubt, Billy has gone into this realizing that he needed more role player depth. We talked about it a couple shows ago. All the guys from Iowa last year were guys that were top six guys in Iowa, and when they needed third or fourth line guys in the NHL, just didn't have that option.
Yeah.
And this gives them another guy who plays that way. And I like the addition.
I just think that it's what he said today. He said something that made me think that David Perron was the guy they wanted, but they only wanted to give him a 1-year deal. And he goes back to Ottawa, French Canadian kid. He's not kid anymore. Ever is a kid to me. He goes to Ottawa on a 2-year deal. At the term, the Wild could have paid him, at a salary the Wild could have paid. Right. But they only wanted to give him 1-year deal. And I think what that's showing you is that they're willing to stretch it out in their bottom six, but they want Yurov in that top six role next year. And then again, if Ogren gets time there this year and proves himself, they just don't want to block those guys out.
Right.
And same thing with Riley Heidt. He's 19 years old, and I don't think that he's going to be an impact guy right off the hop if he even makes the team. But eventually that's a role that they're going to want him at. So they don't want to go. They don't want to stretch out the term too much.
And if you start looking
there.
At the top six, that Boldy's in it. Kaprizov's in it. Rossi's in it. Eriksson is in it. Barring a trade, those guys are there for sure. Zuccarello in the short term, but yes, then you start to look at add Yurov and Ogren there. You can't sign a top six guy to a 4-year deal, but you could sign a bottom six guy to a 4-year deal at a price that. If he ends up scoring, he had 17 a couple of years ago. He had 12 last year. If he scores 12 to 15 goals and provides a physical presence, a good penalty killer,
win some draws if he gets some faceoffs,
then it's worth it.
Yeah, I think I'm still a little shocked at the price and the term. Like I just
4 years didn't bother me at all. I just thought the price was a hair higher than I would have guessed.
I just don't know how many teams were offering him 4 years at 3.5. I mean, I know, it just obviously, we don't know. But Foegele got less term, around the same money, and I don't know. It just felt a little high to me. I was blown away when I saw the term, especially because, again, every time I talk to Bill Guerin for the last several, he keeps on talking about next year's cap situation and how they want to have flexibility. And he's not just talking flexibility cap wise, he's talking roster wise. And now they have, after Faber gets his extension, and now with Middleton getting a 4-year extension, which takes him 5 years out at 4.35, they have more than $73 million. Again, assuming Faber gets 8 to 9, for only 15 players locked up next year. So they are not these fans that have waited throughout the pain of the buyout, the 4 years of it, that thought next year was just going to be this grand spending spree. It's impossible now.
Well, it won't be a grand spending spree, but it also, the core of the team will be locked up when you really look at it. Think about what the defensive core looks like. And not even getting into whether or not Zeev Buium fits into it a year down the road or not, which I think it's a very good chance that he does.
You think this core of a team, though, is good enough to compete with Nashville, Colorado, Dallas? That's my concern, is that not only were they expected to go out and make, like, they're expected to be a contender. Like, the time is up.
Right. And
it's now time to go and put up or shut up.
And we'll see. But I think if you start to look at that defensive core that is the top 4 locked in, and you add Buium to that mix and potentially a Declan Chisholm to that mix, and then you start to look at a forward group that we've only seen Ogren for a handful of games, but he certainly didn't do anything in that handful of games to lessen your expectations or excitement level about him. If Yurov ends up being the type of player that everybody seems to think he can be, and add those guys to Boldy, Eriksson Ek, Kaprizov, Rossi, with a bottom 6 that has potential that for guys who can do more than just be minute eaters and space fillers and penalty killers, guys like Hartman and Foligno and Trenin and Johansson. Yes, I think you've got a core that I think could be a realistic contender in the West.
Yeah.
But you have to have the young guys have to turn out to be what you think they are. And that's what we've been talking. That's when the Billy plan should be evaluated, is once those penalties come off, and now did you structure your roster the best way you could? And we'll see.
Yeah. I guess, I know that you and I have fought about blocking guys out for a long time, but
Trenin doesn't block anybody of significance out.
I mean,
he's a third or fourth line guy.
At some point, at some point, there's only 12 forward spots on the team.
Right.
And, they're going to give Kaprizov hopefully 8 years. They're, Eriksson Ek's locked in for a long time. Maybe Rossi eventually. There's at some point, let's just take the blue line, for example. You got Middleton for another 5. You got Spurgeon for another 4. You got, or 3. You got Brodin for another 4. So you have Buium. Who knows what term Declan's about to get. And you got Buium coming. Eventually, Damon Hunt and David Spacek, you hope you're going to get here. So these guys, if they're any good, are going to be here in that window. And same thing up front. It just seems like they have so many, they don't go after Trenin today if all the guys that he extended last year, Gaudreau, Hartman, Foligno, did their jobs last year. So they're trying to repair a problem that was not fixed based on the guys that he already committed to failing. And so in 1 year, granted, I know they could bounce back, but the more guys you do this for, the less shots there are for all these young kids. And
yeah, I think on the defensive side, that's a little different, only because I think those guys, the prospect guys you're talking about, the Hunts and the Spaceks and the O'Rourke's and whoever. I mean, none of those guys have they're close, but they're not. None of them have shown enough to say this guy just needs an opportunity. That's all he's lacking.
Right.
When Hunt came up, he looked like a serviceable NHL player, but not a guy that you looked at and said, "There's no way this guy's going to be a top 4 guy for sure." You didn't look at him and think that. And so if Buium adds his name to the list of the 4 that are kind of locked in, and then Chisholm maybe, and if one of those other guys ends up being your 6, 7, then you're good. Then you're fine.
Yeah.
And on the forward side,
well, then
but on the forward side, I just think that when you start to look at the guys none of the guys are making what you'd say if you just looked at their contract alone. You wouldn't say, "Boy, that's a terrible contract."
I know.
And
it's when you do 8 of them with no move clauses where it suddenly handcuffs you.
Right. But if you
obviously
put those guys
hyperbolic there.
Right. And if you put those guys in the bottom 6 role, and the other thing we've talked about is that the biggest issue this team faced last year was the penalty kill. Well, why not get a guy who's been a good penalty killer and lock him in for the next 3 or 4 years? That doesn't seem to be a bad decision in my mind. And so I just think what they're looking at is, we think we have guys in.
Just remember, though, Hartman, Foligno, and Gaudreau are supposed to be really good penalty killers too.
And Gaudreau and Foligno were hurt last year, so I think they are good penalty killers. But so if you put those 2 guys together and you add Foligno to that mix, now you got some guys who can kill penalties and maybe provide a little bit of a third or fourth line that can not only check, but can also potentially score. And when the Wild were at their best a couple of years ago, they were riding the best third line in the NHL. And I'm not saying these guys will be the best third line in the league, but they certainly could be serviceable that way and kill some penalties. But if you just look at the top six, though, and you say, all right, well, a Trenin signing for 4 years doesn't block the path of Ogren or Yurov. It's a totally different role. And I think this is an example.
I don't know if that's accurate. I look at Ogren as probably a future middle six guy. And you know,
I look at him as more than a third line guy. But it's off a very short sample size. But I think you look at him and say he's going to end up. Maybe he's not a top three guy, but I think he's a second line, maybe a top line guy.
Maybe I just got warped by talking about the prospect pool over and over and over again for the last 3 years, and the Hunter Heights and the Riley Heights and the 17 defensemen in Iowa and the Parrots and the Hunts and the O'Rourkes and the Lamboses and the Spachiks and Hunts. And it's like at some point you got to give them an opportunity to play. And when you keep on signing guys to 4 or 5 year deals, you don't. And that's just a reality. Yeah, maybe Hunt didn't show this year that he needs just a chance, but now you just signed Middleton for another 5 years. You just drafted a left shot D in Buium. You're about to sign Declan Chisholm. You got Brodin for 4 years. So is Hunt ever going to get an opportunity? Doesn't look that way. David Spacek, same thing.
If one of those guys is your seventh guy, we've seen over the years, the seventh guy plays a lot.
Right.
Somebody gets hurt.
I don't think they were all drafted to be seventh guys.
I don't think they were drafted to be that. But if that's what they are, and we've speculated about Spurgeon this point in his career, his health. Brodin, go to the forwards, and Foligno plays a heavy game. Is it likely that he can continue it at this? Well, now you have Trenin who can play it if he's out. And so if those guys are... If they're too good to be blocked, they'll show it. And then you make another move. So if all of a sudden Damon Hunt, when given an opportunity, all of a sudden looks like, hey, this guy is way too good to be blocked by Declan Chisholm or Jake Middleton or whoever else, well, now that's a great problem to have. Somebody else is going to see it too and say, all right, well, we'll give you this for Damon Hunt, or we'll give you this for any of your other defensemen.
Yeah, but then this can't be in the lineup because they're blocked out. I'm just saying, this is the only organization that I've ever seen that just never turns over its roster for an organization that's achieved jack squat. I mean, that's true. They just keep on re-signing their veterans and never give their great prospect pool the opportunity. I just don't see the plan here. Well, like, to me, when they bought out Parisi and Suter going back 4 years ago, this should have been the beginning of a youth movement. And I know, again, we know the owner wants to win and all that stuff, but it just seems like we're never going to see that. And this was a good example. To me, this was actually a really good opportunity this offseason to say, you know what? You're right. We can't afford David Perron. We don't want to give him 2 years. We don't want to give 4 years to Anthony Declare or this or that. And so, let's just go into the offseason and just hit the brakes here and not sign one more player for another 4 years and just this way you now know that Ogren can be on the team. Now, Ogren and Huzadinov, it's not a guarantee they can be on the team. I mean, if you're going to throw Johansson back on that second line, who knows, where you're putting, you're not going to bring Ogren on the fourth line all year.
No, but if I'm the Wild, I look at it and I say, well, Ogren come to camp and outplay Johansson. And if you do, then you're in the top six. And if you don't, then we'll have you start in Iowa because we don't want you playing on the fourth line.
Right.
We've got a bunch of third and fourth line guys here. What we've been trying to do is set this roster. And when I mean set the roster, when I say set the roster, I mean in both Minnesota and Iowa, where we've got guys that we view as top six, middle six, bottom six, and we need some of all three categories in Iowa. So if Liam Ogren is a top six guy or maybe a high-end middle six guy, well, if that role's not available for the Minnesota Wild, then go to Iowa. and play that role down there. And as soon as somebody's beat up here or slumping or whatever, you'll be back.
And that could be the plan.
But but Ogren's got to come and outplay. Mm-hmm. He's got to come and outplay Marcus Johansson in training camp to earn that spot.
Better. I would hope he could. Although, man, did Johansson have a really good
he was
world
great
championship.
In the world championship.
Let's talk about the whole Johansson Ogren thing right now. So John Hines did a Zoom today with the reporters, and the one thing he did say, because I've been thinking a lot about this now that they haven't gotten, because one big reason why they wanted to go get a David Perron or even trade for Patrick Laine, which is still possible, and we'll get to that in a second, is they want to have somebody that Zuccarello could tee up on that left side, because let's be honest. When he was separated from Kaprizov last year, he just fell off the map. He had 2 goals and 5 assists, I think, at 5-on-5 without Kaprizov last year in like 800 minutes. That's obviously not very good. But that's passing pucks to Marcus Johansson. If you get a left wing there, changes things. So I asked about that today because I started to get the impression from inside the organization that they look at Eriksson Ek with Zuccarello and Kaprizov being a thing again. And so I asked John point blank, and he said with it is.
Boldy and Kaprizov.
Yeah, no, that Zuccarello might be reunited with Kaprizov in camp, and that Boldy would be with Rossi.
But I listened to his comment and thought just the opposite. I thought he was saying like, hey, this line we saw was so dominant last year that we know they're going to be together at some point. But yes, we've talked about splitting them up just to create balance.
Yeah, and so I do think that to start camp, Kaprizov and Zuccarello are going to be reunited, that Boldy would be on that line. And what he did say was that he thought it was a major problem last year that they really had a top 5 and they had to constantly rotate in and out. So I asked him, are you concerned that it looks like it's going to be that case away again? And what he said is that they are going to really almost have a tryout in training camp for that spot. And Ogren's going to get a look. Johansson's going to get a look. I'm sure Ryan Hartman's going to get a look. Maybe Goudreau gets a look. Who knows? But it sure feels like we're heading that way again. Unless there's a lot of training camp left. That's the one thing. Like we always have to caution that at this point, there's that we think that they're done, but they might not be done. So they could still make a trade at some point if they clear up cap space. But
could
right
still be
now,
another move. And we've talked a lot in recent shows about Philip Gustafsson, and I heard what Billy said about it today, that we're just receiving calls. We're not anxious to make the move. And we've speculated on that. And so that could change things dramatically. But I also think that when you look at their roster, and going back to where we started the show, you have those 5 guys. You have 5 guys that probably are no-brainers to be in your bottom 6. I think it's nice to have guys like Johansson and Hartman in your bottom 6 where those guys could easily jump up and play on a second line for maybe Hartman for a season, Johansson maybe for stretches of a season. But Ryan Hartman is a guy, even in last year, what was an off year for him, he still scored 20.
Yeah. But if you remember early that first month of the season, he was like the only one scoring. And so if you actually, I'm going to look that up. I think he had like 10 goals in his first month and a half. And if that's the case, then he really had it down.
He for sure, the second half was not great, but we're talking about a guy who scored over 30 a couple of years ago, scored 20 last year in an off year. I believe he's going to come back as a motivated guy to prove that he should be in the top 6. Let's not forget, this was the guy that was in between Kaprizov and Zuccarello. And if all of a sudden you start to say, well, what if that clicks again? And now the next line has Rossi and Boldy and Eriksson Ek on it or something like that. I mean, I just think there's more upside on the roster than what we saw last year. If that happens, that top 6 doesn't even include Ogren. So where does Ogren fit? And you've got the potential now for a forward group that's a lot deeper than a year ago.
Yeah. The penalty kill is one area that he said that they are going to do everything they can to try to fix that. I mean, man, like that is one area. Here, Hartman had 6 goals in October. So 14 the rest of the way. And he had 4 goals in December, 4 in January. So he just went through a lot of lapses in the season. And he spoiled us the year before, right? With 30 whatever. So that's definitely part of it. Anything else that John said today that really struck your, that was interesting coming into camp?
Not too much. I mean, nothing surprising other than, I thought the conversations about the addition of Jack Capilano to the staff was interesting. The willingness to look at just about anything on a penalty kill, I think, was interesting. And otherwise, not really. I mean, it was exactly what you would have expected him to say about. I think it's great that he has a knowledge and a relationship with Trenin coming in. I think that'll probably help.
Yeah, I would hope so. Definitely. And then the Wild signed 8 guys to two-way contracts, including old friend Travis Boyd, former Gopher, old friend Reese Johnson, who wreaked havoc on the Wild season last year. He's the one that took the run at Spurgeon in the exhibition game. And Drew Shore, another one that we all know. But they did what we thought they would do. They signed a lot of guys to two-way contracts with tons of NHL experience to, as your point, Anthony, if you have injuries in the year, you call up and they're just better suited to be in roles that really they didn't have last year. So, grabbing tough guy, grabbing power play guys, grabbing a 5th goalie who was an AHL goalie of the year a couple of years ago, things like that. Let's do this. Let's take a break. When we come back, Anthony, I want to talk to you about the Stanley Cup Final. Talk to you though about the big thing I want to talk to you about is the rest of we talked about division and some of maybe the free agent signings today that definitely that made us say, oh wow, that's a pretty good one. Seattle, Utah, they had a couple big ones. We'll be right back. There are a lot of options to buy glasses out there. If you've been disappointed by high prices or poor online quality, check out our friends at Huxley Optical. I like Huxley for 2 reasons. First is the price. Simply put, I don't want to spend $800 on glasses. At Huxley, I know I'll get the same quality for half the price. They're a small independent business that is here to help you find glasses you love and save you money. Second is the service. They have options catered to what I need, and I know someone will be happy to help me find glasses. Whether it's a lens replacement, office glasses, or a brand new pair, they're always ready to help. Check out HuxleyEyewear.com. Again, that's HuxleyEyewear.com today, or go to their locations in Wayzata or Roseville. Tell them Russo sent you for 10% off your prescription purchase.
Hey everyone, Attorney Jerry Bosch here with Bosch Law Firm and WorkCompExperts.com. For almost 30 years, we've represented Minnesotans just like you all over the great state of Minnesota to guarantee they've been treated fairly and with respect when they've suffered a work-related injury. A work injury can change your life in an instant. You need someone on your side who can help you focus on getting back on your feet and getting paid while you do. You may be entitled to medical benefits, wage loss benefits, job placement, retraining, and payment for permanent disability. To make sure you are being paid all the work comp benefits you're entitled to, please call the attorneys at Bosch Law Firm. The call is always free, and there's never a fee unless we recover benefits on your behalf. Call 651-333-8300, Bosch Law Firm, or visit us at WorkCompExperts.com.
Anthony, tell us about Feller's Ranch.
Well, I'm excited. As we've talked over the last couple of weeks, Feller's Ranch has joined our show as one of our newest sponsors. I'm thrilled about that because of the quality of their steaks is second to none. They're the best steaks I've had. We had Vinny on. He talked about the spinalis cuts that we had tried. We've had their Denver cuts, which are unbelievable. Their ribeyes are terrific. We just had those at Ariana's graduation weekend. But right now, they just have announced that you'll be able to get their brisket at a place down in the southwestern suburbs, Northern Fire Barbecue. It's a cool spot. They've got an unbelievable selection of spices, and I know that the Fellers guys are really excited to have their Wagyu brisket available there. So if you're interested in brisket, you can check it out there. But as always, if you want their steaks delivered directly to your house, just go to fellersranch.com. Their vans are in the cities every week. They'll get it right to your front door. It couldn't be much easier, and you will not be disappointed in their cuts of steak.
Back here, worst seats in the house, Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta, coming to you from the LaPanta household 9 days before our Porto trip, where Anthony's going to make me drink wine again.
Well, I don't know if it's fair to say make you drink, but I'm trying to learn a little bit about it, and you're going to enjoy it.
You're practicing a lot.
I'm practicing this. The Douro region, we've really found a few really good ones from that.
I can't remember who it was. Somebody the other day, I'm going to feel bad for not remembering this. Somebody the other day sent me a text from Italy that said, that had a picture of my, they were like drinking your namesake wine. It was Russo family wines that we saw in Sicily. God, who was that the other day? It was somebody.
I don't know, but you're going to enjoy the Portuguese wines. We haven't started getting into the Portuguese food yet, but the wine is terrific.
Yeah.
You're going to like it.
How about the Boston Bruins today? They go out, they get Nikita Zadorov and Elias Lindholm, which has been long rumored. Pretty good moves for them.
I like the Lindholm move. The term would worry me if I was a Boston fan. Zadorov,
You're not a fan?
I wouldn't have wanted to give him as much money as they gave him. I know that's probably what it would have taken to get him, but he to me is he's limited in his upside, and it might be what Boston needed. I like the Lindholm signing more, but I thought theirs were interesting. The loss of DeBrusk surprised me a little bit. Mm-hmm. I like DeBrusk a lot, and he seemed to fit their style, their type, the way they want to play. Grzelcyk, I know, slipped this year, but to let him get away, it was kind of interesting how the Boston guys wound up in Vancouver and the Vancouver guys wound up in Boston.
Yeah, it really was. Jeff Skinner, 1 year, $3 million. So would you have done that if you're the Wild? He scored 30-something goals a couple of years ago.
He did, and can still skate.
Not very good defensively, and has never played a playoff game. Coming off a bad year.
And what is it? I thought he had, what was the stat I heard today? He's made $100 million in his career and never played a playoff game.
1,006 NHL games.
Isn't that unbelievable?
It's crazy.
Actually, the couple teams that stood out to me, though, and Carolina we knew was coming, that they had to turn over their roster because of how tight they were to the cap. But what they lost, especially when you consider, if you include Jake Gensel in what they lost, which really was a little bit of it's a little bit different because he wasn't there all year, but the players they lost, it's going to be hard for them to match what they've been the last few years. I like what New Jersey did, starting with the Markstrom trade, but then I really like Brett Pesce a lot, and adding him, I think, will be a big boost for them. And within the Central Division, Nashville, even though the guys are a little bit on the older side of their career, they added some punch. That's a different looking club now.
Yeah. How about Seattle? Brandon Montour.
Seattle's great.
Yep. Chandler Stevenson. That's a lot of money for Chandler.
It is, and I actually thought it was a lot of money for Brandon Montour. And I know,
7 times 7.14.
I thought that was a little high, and it sounded like every expert that I heard talk about it made it sound like it was a no-brainer who's going to get that amount. To me, that seems high, but
yeah. And then obviously Reinhart resigns in Florida, and Gensel
and took a little bit less.
Gensel 7 times 9, pretty good deal for Jake the Snake.
Yeah, it's a great deal for him, and I think Washington's moves were interesting. Adding Jacob Chikrin, who's been a player that everybody's been talking about for a few years, with a guy with huge upsides, never really shown it. But they made a couple other moves that I kind of liked. I think there was a lot more movement today. Mm-hmm. Some teams involved differently than previous years, where in previous years you always kind of had an idea. Here are the 3 or 4 big names. Here are the 3 or 4 teams where they're likely to land. Today it seemed more like there was more volatility to it today than in recent years.
Spent. Pretty crazy. So let's talk about the Stanley Cup Final, then answer a couple Twitter questions and wrap up the show, Anthony. So ran into Charles Barkley in the elevator at the arena down in Florida. And then I leave the elevator, and I almost walked right into Shaq too. So that was kind of cool seeing the two of them there. You know who I ran into down there? Alexander Daig. Remember Alexander Daig played for the Wild? He
was a number 1 overall pick.
Number 1 overall pick for Ottawa. He told me, he's like, you know who I run into all the time in Quebec? I'm like, who? He goes, Manny Fernandez. I'm like, really? Get that guy to return a text every now and then. I have been unable to get in touch with Fernandez since like he left here.
Why are you trying to get a hold of him?
Just like over the years doing stories, you know.
You just want to say hi?
Histories. Well, he didn't love me. By the way, the other thing I loved about the draft was all the teams that had like Celine Dion come out or Michael Buffer, people like that. You find that fun?
Not really.
Scott Niedermeyer?
Yeah, no, it really doesn't do. I thought the whole show was cool, but to have that part doesn't do much for
The
me.
award show is wonderful.
But the award show.
No, I'm just
so
kidding.
I know, but tell me about. So in previous years, the award show was when you found out who won the awards,
Yeah. Now it's like a comedy show.
and everybody already knew who won most of them.
Yeah. So, well, they left like 5: the Ted Lindsay, the Vesna, the Calder, the Hart, and one other, Norris. And they did that because they were trying to. They announced a bunch, like Jack Adams, GM of the Year, Lady Bing, they announced Selke, they announced a ton of things earlier. And the reason why they did this was to stream it down so it wouldn't be so monotonous and boring and corny and all that stuff. And you know, it's funny because the first award was the Calder. Obviously, we knew that Brock was probably not winning. Aaron Sickman, the Wild's crack PR guy, got us Bill Guerin, Sarah McClellan, and me. Bill Guerin and Brock Faber before the show. So Sarah and I went up to the press room, it was in like the mezzanine level of the theater, which looked down. And so they had all these seats that looked over the theater, and then they had seats against the wall facing away from the theater. And so Sarah and I sat at those seats and just started transcribing and writing. And then we found out, obviously, that Brock didn't win. So the entire show, she and I were writing, but not watching. So all these people that were reacting so negatively on Twitter, even though we were in the building, we were not seeing any of it. Like, people were like, is this the worst thing you've ever seen live? And I'm like, actually, I'm here, but I'm not watching 1 minute of it because I was writing.
I didn't watch any of the award show, and I just thought it was so weird that we knew who won so many of them in advance.
Exactly.
It didn't make any sense to me.
Exactly.
The whole point of being a finalist was that the 3 finalists would come to the award show and one of them would win.
Yep. Before I talk to you about the Florida Panthers, Alex Morello out as the future owner of the Arizona Coyotes. Shocker.
It was a shocker.
Oh, my God. What a con artist.
Right now, if you had to guess, I know there are a few other groups down there, and I've already heard some of them talking about that, hey, we'd like to bring hockey back. What do you think the odds are that somebody steps up and gets hockey back to Phoenix in the window that would have been Morello's window?
It's going to be tougher now because they got to get a shovel in the ground. So now I think it's the NHL. Let's put it this way: if it happens fast, we know the NHL could have helped all along, but chose not to because they wanted to get rid of this absolute crackhead. I mean, it's just truly unbelievable how much that guy just and for being the most incompetent owner in the world, he gets $1 billion for his trouble. Like, the league did him a solid to get him out of there. And now they knew that there was no way he was going to go through with this auction. He and his son are out, thankfully. And now we can go on with the rest of our lives.
I wonder if we'll take over the Arizona Coyotes Twitter account.
I know. Well, hopefully they took it away from that kid because the son really just played with the heartstrings, which is why I'm so I've been just so negative toward that family for so long, because for a year and a half they were playing with the heartstrings, the emotions of Arizona Coyotes fans, knowing all along that they were just behind the scenes, just submarining everything, not paying their bills. Even on the night where it was obvious that they were coming in to announce that they were getting the team, they're putting out arena sketches on their Twitter,
right.
Just absolute garbage, just the worst of the worst. And the league knew that there was no way they were going to be part of it in the future, and blah, blah, blah. Florida Panthers, it took me long enough in the show to talk about the Stanley Cup Final, Anthony. And you know what I was mostly shocked at is that when I went on the ice, there wasn't like any part of me that was even like a little like sort of emotional. Like, it is kind of where I grew up. I was in that building when it was under construction, and just going out there and seeing the team that I got my start, win a cup. You would have thought I would have been touched, but apparently I have a heart of rock like you. I've been around you forever.
I'm very emotional.
Yeah, you are. There's nothing that bothers you. So shockingly, but I went out there.
Nothing bothers me, but I get excited about things.
Yeah. But I don't know. For some reason, it was just, I mean, look, I've been here double the amount of time I was in Florida covering that team. So obviously, but
So if it happened here, you would be emotional.
Oh, yeah. I'd be just weeping like a. Yeah. I mean, no, I actually that was the one thing I did want to say. Like, the one thing I hope is that Wild fans get to experience that because they deserve it. It is like those fans there went through 2 decades of not seeing a playoff series
Two
victory.
decades of not coming to games.
Yeah, but would you come to a game if you from 1996 to 2022 you didn't see a playoff series?
I don't
win?
know that, but probably not.
Yeah.
But that's why Wild fans are so special because they have been coming.
Right.
And the arena's full every night.
Right.
Not down there. We'd go to games down there. There'd be 5,000 people in the stands. Right. And then all of a sudden when they make their playoff run, now it's all these, I've been a Panthers fan forever.
That's the way it was when the Marlins won their World Series too. The year, it's just the way they are down there. It's a, you got to win to show up because there's so many things to do. But it was great being out there and seeing guys like Rick Dudley lift the cup, seeing Roberto Luongo lift the cup, Jovo, Bill Lindsay, those guys that have been around that organization, Randy Moeller since, for 30 years that have seen all the ups and downs of an unstable franchise and get to the point where they're just a really good team. And what's shocking is they win a cup. They have their celebration yesterday and today they get rid of everybody, everybody
Which is the same
left.
thing the Marlins did.
Yeah.
After they won it.
And this wasn't a cost cutting thing. This was just, look, hey, they're capped out. And so you could replace the Kulikov re-signed, but you could replace the Stenlins. Obviously, it was too quick of a turnaround to try to trade Eklund and maybe Aaron Ekblad, and then so trade him and maybe keep a Montour. Was just too late in the game. That was one thing I think
the
they would try
Montour
to
thing
do.
was the one that was weird because he was such a prevalent part of all the parade and the ceremony and everything, and probably knowing all along that tomorrow I'm signing somewhere else.
Stenlin leaves, Ekman Larson leaves. It was pretty interesting.
I don't know how much difference 2 weeks would make, but as we were talking a couple of weeks ago, the NHL's got to figure this out. You can't award the cup 3 days before free agency happens. It just doesn't feel right.
I mean, even that fact that they needed to have their parade basically a week later just because the management and the scouts had to go to
draft.
Vegas.
Right. So you had the Stanley Cup, the draft, and a day.
Yeah.
And then you're into free agency.
And it had to be rain. It was pouring rain and it had to be rain or shine. They couldn't postpone it because today was July 1 and half these guys were signing elsewhere.
Right. So even if you pushed it back and allowing a 2-week breathing period for a town or a team and a roster to celebrate a championship together would be better than having it be, all right, here's the cup. Where are you signing next year?
Yep. All right, couple Twitter questions. Mitch asked, with cap friendly going away in the next few days, do you think the league would ever expand NHL.com to provide contract info? As long as Gary Bettman is running this league, no. It's crazy. I mean, just to a point, do you think they're going to give us this contract info if they don't even give the teams? All this stuff that cap friendly has is stuff that they compile. This is there's no central registry computer that the league can go in and look at contracts for everybody else. It's bizarre to me.
I wanted to ask you about that a couple of weeks ago when the news came out that the Capitals were buying it, because it's similar to a few years back when the Wild hired the people that were on the cutting edge of the advanced statistics and analytics. And I'm not sure what'll happen. I'm sure somebody else will come up with a way to.
Well, there is Puckpedia until somebody buys Puckpedia.
Right. But the whole point of a team taking buying this, it's not that dissimilar from when the Wild did that in the analytics world,
with Alex
whatever it
Andrew.
was, 6 or 8 years ago.
It was War on Ice, right?
Right. And they were the ones that were ahead of the game in that way. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if this is the same way the Capitals are looking at it as, well, let's just hire them.
Yeah.
And now we'll be ahead of the game.
Take their infrastructure. And absolutely. I think that's definitely what's going on. Trevor asks, let's see how you're going to answer this. We talked a lot about it. Why does it seem like we're trying to make it real hard on all our prospects to earn a spot on the team? You disagree with that, right?
I disagree with it only in that I think the players that we've locked up are different players than the players that are our top end prospects. And I've always believed that the prospect guys earn your spot. Come up, and when you get your chance, every single guy that the Wild have had in their pipeline, in their prospect pool over the last few years, they've all gotten an opportunity, and not one of them has come up and played so well that you would have said, boy, this guy's just been held down all along. And you start to look at but
part of them is playing them. I mean, you think that Eetu Luostarinen and Anton Liddell were Anton Liddell and Eetu Luostarinen right away. They needed time and patience. There's so many people in Florida that wanted to get rid of Anton Liddell by now. But
look at Anton Liddell and compare him to the guys we're talking about in the Wild prospect pool. Like, who are the guys that have been blocked?
But it's over. It's these guys. We don't have to turn this into that again. But I'm like, again, the blue liners are the only ones that are really turned pro right now. But like, if Caden Bankier is ever going to make it, if these blue liners are ever going to make it, if Hunter Hate's ever going to make it, Riley Heidt, there's got to be still roster spots.
And I think, and if those guys are good enough and prove to be as good of prospects as so far they've been touted, you'll find room. Because start to look at in a year, Johansson's gone. Soon after that, Zuccarello's gone. Those are the top 6 roles where these guys are going to fit long term. The fact that they extend some guys that are going to be 3rd and 4th line guys, and I'm not trying to diminish 3rd and 4th line guys, they're important, and lock those guys up. They play totally different roles. Yurov is not going to be on Minnesota's 4th line. At least you hope he's not. Ogren is not going to be on your 4th line. And
I don't know. I mean, again, though, like part of the job of your minors is you don't have to always develop top 6 guys and top defensemen. Part of the job is not overspending for your 3rd and 4th line guys. So then you have Michael Milne at $800,000. And then when Michael Milne gets too good to where he needs a $3 or $4 million contract, like a Barclay Goodrow or Yanni Gourde, then you trade him and you kind of start over. And that's the cycle. But it seems like the Wild just always want to give $4 million deals to everybody in their bottom 6 and their 2nd and 3rd defense pairs. And I just think that's part of your prospect pool, is to use the guys that are Michael Milne or Caden Bankier at entry-level contracts and put them in those spots. Yeah. And that allows you to go out and spend a lot of money in your top 6 or your top 9. And it just feels like the Wild have priced themselves out because they constantly are signing bottom 6 guys and giving them no moves and no trades. That's just my opinion here. And
there's a couple of guys that even at the time of the signing, when we've talked about it, we've said, it's probably $500,000 more per year than you would have thought he was worthy. But you always have to look at it as if that's what it took to get the deal done. You don't know what else was out there at the time.
Right. Good podcast, Anthony. Good chatting with you. We'll do one more show before we go to Portugal. Then we're going to do the old bring the equipment over to Portugal, and we'll do a live show at the end of our tour, which is always fun with the group. And we got like 40 people on this Portugal tour. Anthony, we're going to do one of those
for sure,
like
the
dinner thing again.
For a dinner. Sure, why not? I look at Margot as I say that just because I know she's in favor. Yeah, absolutely. It was fun. We had 3 of the couples from last year's trip coming up. Yeah, why not? We'll do it.
We'll make it 4 this time, right, Anthony?
Well, the table only fits 12, so it'll be 3 couples, Russo, Michael Kenny. It'll be perfect.
Yep, perfect. All right, that's awesome. Thanks to our incredible sponsors and for joining us at the Aquarius Home Services studio, which is
in Shoreview.
It's on location this week. And thanks to Aquarius Home Services, your local authorized dealer for Connecticut water treatment systems, Royal Credit Union, Huxley Optical, Bosch Law Firm, and Fellers Ranch. Talk to you next week, everybody.
Sounds great.
So much coming out, there's nothing